On the outskirts of a quiet, nameless village in India stood an ancient, crumbling mansion. Locals only referred to it in whispers, calling it Bhoot Haveli, the ghost mansion. No one dared to enter the grounds after sunset. It was said that anyone who went near the house at night never came back the same. In 1975, an ambitious journalist named Arun decided to investigate the truth behind the mansion. He was skeptical of supernatural tales and was determined to expose the story as mere superstition. Equipped with a tape recorder, camera, and notebook, he set out one evening to spend the night in the mansion, determined to uncover the truth. Rumor had it that in the 1920s, a wealthy family of 4 moved into the mansion. They were known to be reclusive, rarely interacting with the villagers. One night, the entire family vanished without a trace. Days later, their lifeless bodies were found by a milkman who came to deliver milk. The villagers claimed they saw blood running down the walls, and some even heard cries echoing in the dead of night. Since then, anyone who ventured into the mansion after dark would either disappear or be found later in a state of insanity, muttering incomprehensible words, often about a woman in white. As Arun set foot inside the mansion, a chill settled over him, as if the air itself was warning him to turn back. The mansion's grand hallway was blanketed in dust, with torn curtains blowing slightly, despite there being no wind. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, resonating through the silence. Arun brushed off the uneasy feeling and began exploring, recording every step he took. He first entered the living room, where the air felt thicker, almost suffocating. He took photos and tried recording the eerie silence. Hours passed, and Arun began to feel drowsy, so he decided to rest on an old, worn-out couch. In the dead of night, a sudden sound jolted him awake. It was faint at first, a whisper, a woman's voice calling his name, Arun. He froze, his heart pounding. He had told no one about his investigation. How could anyone know his name? Determined to find the source, he followed the whisper down a narrow corridor where portraits hung on the walls, their faces twisted into expressions of terror. As he walked, he saw shadows moving in his peripheral vision, but every time he turned to look, there was nothing there. At the end of the hallway, he found a door slightly ajar. Inside was a room he hadn't noticed earlier. The walls were covered in old, tattered wallpaper, with a large mirror hanging opposite the door. In the reflection, he saw her, a woman dressed in white, her face hidden behind long, black hair. Her body swayed slightly, as if dancing to a silent tune. Paralyzed by fear, he watched as she slowly turned her head towards him, revealing hollow, empty eyes that seemed to pierce into his soul. Suddenly she reached out to him, and he felt an intense, icy grip around his wrist. In a panic, he stumbled backward and fled the room, hearing her voice echo through the hall. "You cannot leave. You belong to me now." Desperate to escape, Arun ran toward the exit. But the mansion seemed to warp, twisting and turning, each hallway leading him back to the same room with the mirror. He tried covering his ears, but her whispers grew louder, filling his mind with an overwhelming sense of dread. He could feel her presence around him, taunting him, her cold breath on his neck. No matter where he went, he saw her reflection in every mirror, every window. She seemed to be everywhere, watching him, her empty eyes drilling into his psyche. Hours passed, and Arun's mind began to unravel. He lost track of time, each moment blending into the next, an endless loop of terror. His notebook, once filled with observations, now bore scribbled words he didn't remember writing. Pleas for help, incoherent ramblings, and the words, "I see her," scrawled over and over. The next morning, the villagers found Aaron stumbling out of the mansion, his eyes wide with terror, his body covered in scratches. He muttered nonsensical phrases talking about the woman in white, the eyes in the mirror, and being watched. He couldn't recognize anyone, not even his closest friend who had come searching for him. For weeks, he was kept under medical care, but he never returned to his former self. Aaron spent the rest of his life in silence, haunted by visions of the woman. Every night, he would wake up screaming, claiming to see her standing at the foot of his bed, waiting to take him back. Today the mansion still stands, abandoned and desolate. Locals warn travelers never to go near it, especially at night. Occasionally brave souls venture close to it, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous woman in white. But they always return, their faces pale, eyes hollow, whispering stories of hearing a voice, calling their names in the dead of night. The legacy of the mansion. Uncovering the truth. Years passed since Aaron's harrowing experience, but the story of the mansion only grew stronger in the village's lore. No one dared to enter, and the mansion sat as a silent, decaying reminder of the horrors it held. But one person was determined to investigate further. Aaron's niece, Maya. Maya had grown up listening to her uncle's story, though her family forbade any discussion about the mansion. As she grew older, she became more and more curious about what really happened that night. Now an adult, Maya was also a journalist, and she believed the stories were merely a result of Arun's trauma and the villagers' superstitions. Despite her family's protests, she decided to visit the mansion herself to discover the truth. Armed with a flashlight, recording equipment, and her uncle's notebook, she set out to document what was fact and what was legend. As Maya entered the mansion, the air felt heavy, almost pressing against her chest. She felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had been there before. The hallway was as her uncle had described: dust-covered floors, torn curtains, and those haunting portraits, still bearing expressions of silent agony. In the dim light of her flashlight, Maya noticed a few items scattered on the floor that seemed out of place: a rusted camera, a broken pen, and scraps of old paper. She knelt down, picking up one of the papers, only to realize it was a page from her uncle's notebook. The words, "She's watching," were scribbled in his frantic handwriting. Maya's heart raced. She forced herself to press on, determined not to let fear cloud her judgment. She moved down the hallway, her flashlight casting eerie shadows as she went, each step bringing her closer to the room where her uncle had claimed to see the woman. At the end of the hallway, Maya found herself standing before the same door Arun had described. Inside, the large mirror still hung opposite the entrance, but this time, the room felt alive, humming with a strange energy. As Maya stepped inside, she felt a wave of cold wash over her, chilling her to the bone. She stared into the mirror, half expecting to see something or someone behind her. At first, she saw only her own reflection, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. But as she continued to look, her reflection began to change. She watched in horror as her face distorted, shifting into that of another woman. Hollow eyes, wild hair, a pale face that seemed to reach through the glass. Panicking, she backed away, but the image in the mirror stayed the same, as if frozen in time, staring right at her. The woman in the reflection slowly raised a hand, pressing it against the mirror's surface, and Maya felt a strange pull, as if the woman was trying to drag her into the glass. Maya stumbled back, her flashlight flickering. She heard a whisper, a voice that sounded exactly like her uncle's, yet hollow, distorted. It said, "Maya, get out." Shaken, Maya stumbled out of the room, her heart pounding. She could still hear whispers echoing around her, each one calling her name in a different voice. Her mother, her father, even her own voice. The walls seemed to come alive, murmuring phrases in low, guttural tones. She tried to cover her ears, but the voices grew louder, like a haunting symphony. As she frantically searched for the exit, she noticed something odd on the walls, a series of handprints, faint but visible in the dim light. They seemed to be leading her somewhere, each one guiding her through the dark maze of hallways. Despite her fear, she felt compelled to follow. The handprints led her down a narrow staircase she hadn't noticed before. The steps creaked under her weight, and with each step, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. At the bottom of the stairs, Maya found herself in a large, dimly lit basement. The room was filled with old furniture, broken relics, and piles of forgotten belongings, as if the past inhabitants had left in a hurry. In the corner, she saw an old trunk, partially open. Inside, she found more pages from her uncle's notebook, each one scribbled with words of terror, recounting his final hours in the mansion. Maya's hands shook as she read, piecing together the fragmented story. Her uncle's last words spoke of a woman in white, a ghost cursed to relive her suffering, trapped in a cycle of despair. The entries grew more erratic, as if he had been slowly losing his mind. The final page simply read, "I am her. She is me." Suddenly, Maya felt a hand on her shoulder. She froze, her blood turning to ice as she slowly turned around. Standing behind her was the woman in white, her face contorted in rage and sorrow. Her hollow eyes locked onto Maya's, and a wave of emotions washed over her. Grief, anger, betrayal. She realized, with a horrifying certainty, that the woman had been waiting for her, waiting to finish what had begun so long ago. The villagers found Maya the next morning, just as they had found her uncle years before. She was in a state of shock, her eyes distant, her body trembling. She couldn't speak, only muttering the same phrase over and over. "I am her. She is me." Maya, like her uncle, was never the same. She was haunted by visions of the woman, hearing her whispers in the dead of night, seeing her reflection in every mirror. She spent her nights awake, waiting, as if she knew the woman would come for her again. The mansion still stands untouched, each year claiming another victim, brave or foolish enough to enter. The villagers say that anyone who goes in hears voices calling their name, as if the spirits within are searching for someone to join them in their endless haunting vigil. And so, the legend lives on, a warning to all who dare approach the mansion in the dead of night. The curse. Revealed months passed since Maya's fateful encounter in the mansion. She remained in a near catatonic state, plagued by nightmares and whispers that only she could hear. Her family, desperate to understand what happened, sought the help of a local priest, Father Jacob, who had long studied paranormal cases. He was one of the few people in the village who believed there was more to the mansion than mere superstition. Father Jacob was an old wise man who had seen his share of unexplained occurrences. When he learned about Maya's condition, he decided to investigate the mansion himself, hoping to break the curse that haunted her and so many others. Armed with holy artifacts, prayers, and his deep faith, he entered the mansion just before sunset. As he crossed the threshold, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if unseen eyes were watching him from every corner. Inside the mansion, Father Jacob noticed strange symbols etched into the walls, markings he recognized as part of an old ritual meant to bind spirits. In a diary he found in the dusty remains of the basement, he uncovered the mansion's tragic history. Years before the wealthy family moved in, the mansion had belonged to a young widow named Amara. She was shunned by society after her husband's mysterious death, and rumors spread that she had practiced black magic to bring him back. Desperate to escape her suffering, she performed a ritual to reconnect with her husband, unaware that it would entrap her spirit in a cycle of despair. Unable to rest, Amara's spirit lingered, waiting for others to fall into her cursed existence. Anyone who entered the mansion after dark was drawn into her grief and madness, their souls slowly breaking down until they became part of her twisted world. Father Jacob realized that Amara wasn't an evil spirit. She was a tormented soul, cursed by her own desperation and loneliness. The only way to free her and end the curse was to release her spirit from its binds, but doing so would require a personal sacrifice. Father Jacob continued his search, feeling Amara's presence growing stronger. He entered the same room with the mirror, and there he finally saw her, a beautiful yet broken woman in white, her hollow eyes filled with centuries of sorrow. She looked at him, a silent plea in her gaze, as if begging for release. "Amara," he whispered, clutching his cross. "You are bound here, but it doesn't have to be this way. I can help you find peace." For a moment her expression softened, and the air in the room grew still. But then a fierce gust of wind shook the mansion as shadows twisted around her, merging with the darkness. She shrieked, her form becoming distorted, torn between her yearning for peace and the curse that held her captive. With a calm yet determined voice, Father Jacob began a prayer, reciting words meant to release trapped spirits. The room trembled as Amara's form flickered, her spirit struggling against the force binding her. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him as if the very walls of the mansion resisted the ritual. As Father Jacob continued his prayer, he felt his strength waning. Amara's spirit was powerful, bound by generations of suffering and darkness. He realized that if he wanted to free her, he would have to give a part of himself. In a final act of faith, he knelt and closed his eyes, offering his soul as a vessel to carry her suffering, releasing her spirit from the mansion. A blinding light filled the room as Amara's figure faded, her sorrow lifting like a fog dispersing at dawn. The shadows dissolved, the whispers ceased, and the air became calm. Father Jacob felt a wave of overwhelming sadness pass through him, but he remained steady, knowing he had given Amara the peace she had yearned for over the centuries. As he exited the mansion, he felt a faint warmth on his shoulder, like a gentle touch of gratitude. Amara's spirit was finally at rest. The mansion, once dark and foreboding, now stood empty, its curse lifted. Maya slowly began to recover, the shadows that once haunted her lifting. She could still feel a faint connection to her uncle, as if he were watching over her, and she would often dream of him, standing beside the priest in a field of light, at peace. Though the mansion remains a relic of the past, a reminder of the tragedies it once held, it no longer carries the aura of fear and darkness. The villagers still tell the story of Bhut Havali, but now they speak of the priest's bravery and the mysterious disappearance of the woman in white, whose spirit was finally laid to rest. Today, the mansion stands abandoned, its walls whispering only in the memories of those who once feared it. And while some say they still see a faint shadow in the windows, those who know the full story believe it's just a memory, a ghost of what once was, and a testament to a priest's selfless act that ended the horror of the dead of night.